We are a group of friends, bound by our appreciation for liberty and good podcasting. Free-minded thinkers from all walks of life, our values come together with one accord to discuss the common culture and news of the day, along with whatever random crap is going on in our lives. Welcome to the Union of the Unknowns.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Union of the Unknowns. Today, Terry and I will be discussing spirituality and religion in kind of a free-form discussion. Terry just kind of had some thoughts on this, so we decided to go with that topic for today's show. And we're going to just see wherever the conversation takes us. And while I'm here, I am your host today, Ashley, Think, Change, Repeat. And of course, with me, as I said, is Terry, the Volcano Buster. How are you, Terry?
I'm very well, thank you, Ashley. Hello, everyone, and hello to all our viewers and listeners.
Very good. So what do you have for us today, Terry? What were you thinking as far as what made you want to talk about this topic? And tell us a little bit of what you want to cover today.
The main reason I want to talk about it is that I find it interesting. I've had a bit of a journey in my life. I should say to all our fans right now that generally when Ashley and I have a chat, either she or I have got something prepared, some notes. We haven't got anything today, so we're not quite sure what's going to happen. So I might start off by talking a bit about my journey, because I would say for a lot of my life, I thought of myself as an atheist, which is a stupid thing to be, really, because you could be an agnostic, which is the better, much more scientific way of approaching it, because I don't know really whether there's a God or not, or whether there's afterlife or anything. But to be an atheist was just a bit stupid, really. So looking back, it was like I was also a bit of a socialist at the time. So there you go. I had a lot of stupid beliefs.
You've had an evolution.
I had a kind of almost kind of like actually it was more like almost like a revelation, really, because I started reading about afterlife and spirituality and paranormal stuff, and I read a lot about people having near-death experiences and then going off and meeting their loved ones up there and getting sent back saying it's not your time. And so when I was thinking about this a lot, and they always talk about how you go into this realm that's very hard to describe, and you're surrounded by all this love, and the word they use a lot is ineffable, which means you can't really describe it. It's completely out of our normal experience. So and that kind of thing actually happened to me in some dreams when I was quite old, actually. So and they often say about the paranormal is that when you start looking at it, sometimes it will look back at you, and that because if you start investigating things, you start to have these experiences. So yeah, that was quite. I did kind of experience a little bit of what people were talking about in near-death experiences, and it was undescribable and nothing like our sort of our matrix-like world. And a lot of people say that they felt that was the real world. They felt more at home there than they do here. So my beliefs are kind of not really sort of like a lot of people in conventional religions. I think I've said on this podcast before, I'm a bit skeptical of those. But I do believe in a sort of spiritual realm. I actually believe we probably have many lives, and that each one is we're trying to sort of learn one particular lesson. So that's where I came from. So I don't know. Do you want to talk about some of the things you sort of think about, Ash?
Yeah, so that is really interesting. And I would actually like to delve into the experience that you had that kind of changed your mind and changed your opinion. If you felt that you had similar to a near-death experience in a dream. But you're right, it is often described as ineffable. And so I would love to get into that. But quickly, I will get into a little bit of my kind of evolution of thought on this subject. So I was, I would say, casual Christian growing up. I did go to church and things like that, but um, I think there was something about that experience. I mean, I never had any bad experiences or anything like that, but I wasn't made to go religiously or like very regularly or anything like that. And I felt like, I think because I was kind of a sensitive kid, that I felt a lot of guilt. And ultimately, I didn't like that feeling. Now we can reflect on that. What did that mean or anything, eh, looking back now? But at the time, I think that I kind of struggled with that, and I didn't have a good way to express that and have a conversation surrounding that. And as I got older, I really wasn't involved in the church or anything like that. And then eventually, again, you said that you were kind of a socialist, and this was the time that I started considering myself an atheist, was when I went to college. And it wasn't necessarily, at least to my memory, that I was in class and this communist professor was like, you need to be an atheist or anything like that. I just was sort of questioning the whole structure. I was questioning organized religion. I had a lot of questions then, and I still do. But so basically, though, I was an atheist for many, many years. And I think it was probably around the time that I went to massage school, and something just kind of hit me one day that you you truly can sense people's energy. You can walk into a classroom, and
Wow.
and this was what I did, and you could just sense the vibe was off, or the vibe was not good, or the vibe was good, or something like that. And as simple as that sounds, there is some kind of sensing that you're doing. And it just made me start thinking, like, if people have the ability to kind of emit this presence to you. And then I'm starting to study, the muscles of the human body, the anatomy of the human body, and this really incredible, complicated structure. It didn't make it no longer made sense to me, and it became no longer something that I could describe myself as an atheist. Now, there were other factors, right? Like, there
Mhm.
were, my nieces and nephew were born, and these beautiful experiences, these very pure souls, um, that it just no longer made sense to me that atheism was the correct answer. And so I was kind of mulling this over for many years, and I had a really good friend who is religious, and especially, I mean, he's always been religious, but he is, especially during 2020 times, and he was having a hard time, and he made a commitment to read the Bible every single day, work his way through the whole Bible. He's making notes. We're having a lot of conversations about just religion, basically, and Christianity, and what do we think, and our journeys and things like that. And eventually I just got to the point where I was like, you know what? I do think that that is actually it. I do believe in Jesus. And so I went from saying I'm an atheist to saying, like, I am definitely not an atheist. I'm not saying what I am. I don't know what I am, to then uh, believing in Christianity. Although that doesn't mean that I don't have critique on organized religion, and I think the nature of human beings is very flawed. I also don't claim to be a theologian. I'm not here to lecture anybody, and I'm not here to know all the ins and outs, because I don't. But this is just a little blip about my personal kind of the transition of my thinking from being an atheist to being a Christian, and feeling like that actually does align with my belief system in the best way. And certainly there is no way that I'm going to call myself an atheist ever again. There is no way. It's completely impossible. Whenever you see the complexity and the miracle that is the human body and everything that goes into that for you to be able to walk. I just couldn't believe it anymore.
Yeah, lots of great stuff there. I think that's your attitude's a very sensible way to be, actually. And I would agree with most of what you say there, that, I think fundamentally we are energy beings. And I've experienced what you do from the other side. I went to this fantastic therapist in the UK who was more like a sort of energy healer, really, than a massage therapist, although she would be doing massage, but she would be able to sense things that had happened to me just by, not necessarily in the part of the body that she was working on. She would say, oh, it feels like you've got, some injury in your arm or something. And I would sort of say, no, I don't think so. And, oh, yeah, no, I did. Yeah, I fell over last week. And it was quite amazing, really. And I've started going to one here that is very similar. And she seems to be able to do stuff with energy that Fiona went to her first, and this woman was trying to treat her just by putting hands on her. And I've mentioned many times that Fiona's health is very fragile. She had such a powerful reaction that she was, I think she was in bed for like a week afterwards. It completely knocked her out. But all this woman was doing was putting her hands on her very gently. She wasn't even massaging her or anything. And she's been doing that with me, because I've got an old running injury that it bothers me when I go out running. So she's been trying to treat that. And, she was saying things during the treatment, like Fiona was sitting on the chair. She was saying to Fiona, well, you might feel some effects from this afterwards, even though she was just sitting on one side. And there would have been a time when I would have thought, well, that doesn't sound, it sounds a bit like, crazy stuff, but I totally believe it now. So to go back to what you were talking about, religions, I think my problem with them is, I think with all mainstream religions, there's a core of truth. And if you go back to the source of the, like go back to Jesus's time, undoubtedly he was telling people how to live a better life, and his teachings were amazing. And maybe he was one of these sort of higher beings that had come down to earth to sort of lead us on a better path. But I think the trouble with religions is, because they are so influential in society, they get co-opted and sort of infiltrated by bad people. And you look at things like the Catholic Church and all the things that have been going on there with like pedophilia, and the Pope, the last Pope, was saying how that everyone should get jabbed. What made me think about that was that Peter McCulloch, who's a really good sort of non-COVIDian doctor, he was one of the most published doctors before COVID came along, and then because he was a bit of a he didn't quite go along with the mainstream narrative. Of course, he's been ostracized and outed from some of his jobs. But he's just written a book about vaccines in general, and he's made a huge journey because now he's skeptical about all vaccines. And the reason I mention this, the cover of his book is a Vatican coin that they struck during COVID, and it just showed this child getting jabbed by a doctor, and this was an official coin from the Vatican. You just think, Jesus, how evil can these people get? And they were all in favor of the COVID vaccine, but they weren't bothered about the fact that this was developed using aborted fetal tissue, and that should be absolutely anathema to the Catholic Church, but they don't seem to care about that sort of stuff now. And the other thing about COVID was it really exposed the fact that a lot of religions were not having their eyes on heaven and more spiritual matters. They just said, well, we've got to close because we're worried about dying from COVID. If you're really a religious person, you shouldn't be worried about your earthly life at all. Your eyes should be on the more spiritual matters, and you should be it's a time when people needed the company of their fellow Christians or whatever in the church to give them spiritual succor. But no, they just didn't want to do this. So that made me even more skeptical about them, actually. So I've said a lot there, so I'll pass it back over to you for a bit.
So you've said a lot of interesting things and a lot of things that I certainly agree with. So let me go to a couple of shout outs really quick with the people that we have joining us live. And I have some interesting comments as well.
Right.
So we have some of our friends over on Rumble. So I wanted to shout those folks out and say hello and thank you so much for joining us. So we had our friend Jen the Ninja, who has been on with the Unknowns a couple of times and is one of my really good friends. And I'm going to circle back to Jen, but thank you for joining us. We have CJP Rumble. Thank you. We have Jason
That's
Barker,
right.
Knights of the Storm. And so thank you all for joining us over on Rumble. Then we also have in Twitch, we have Song of Zeroth, and they have brought a couple Sun. They said, call me son. Okay. So they have made a couple of comments on what we're discussing. And they said that intelligent design doesn't mean conscious operation. However, even if evolution created everything, it still comes from a higher form. And even if that thing is a single cell organism, but in a higher dimension, it would still be God. So I think that that's an interesting thought. It would be something probably that I would need to mull over a little bit, but I'm certainly open to hearing other people express their opinions on how we got here and the conversation about God. I personally don't believe really in any of the traditional things that we've ever been told from a Darwinian perspective on evolution, and things like that anymore. Anyway, thank you for that comment. And then they said the corporations that run religion don't like change because they think it will legitimize them being false. And how can they be appointed by God if they're wrong? Depends on the heaven. So I think that these are interesting thoughts for sure. As far as having sort of these institutional religions being infiltrated, as Terry was talking about, I certainly would subscribe to that. And I think that that is maybe unfortunately the nature of man. I mean, maybe that can help us to have our faith be stronger, but realize that if you're putting all of your faith in a specific institution, that is very fallible. And of course, I think that not pointing out the hypocrisy of these institutions is an absolute problem. So like Terry was talking about in this particular example, the Catholic Church, because we do know that we had the widespread scandal of priests harming children and that really being swept under the rug. Now, something that I've questioned was why was that narrative allowed to make it to the mainstream? And I believe it was a major newspaper in Massachusetts. If anyone knows, feel free to drop that in the chat. That ended up, it might have been the Boston Globe that sort of broke this story, even though this had been happening and being covered up for a very long time. And we knew that these priests would often, if they were identified and they were called out on their actions for harming children, that they would simply be moved to another parish and they would have that swept under the rug. So something changed whenever the Boston Globe, if I'm correct about that newspaper, ended up breaking this massive story, and it really sent kind of shockwaves through the community, whether you were part of the Catholic Church or not. And it certainly caused people to step back from the Catholic Church. And part of me, of course, that's a legitimate concern that this kind of corruption and cover up and harming of children is happening. But I think that we need to look at the why was that allowed to be shown when it had been well known in some circles for a very long time. Part of me believes that it is part of this. If you subscribe to the New World Order or the Predator class or whatever you want to say, if it is important for their means for us to be kind of outside of these traditional institutions, and if they think that you would be more easily controlled in, this new world religion, if you subscribe to that, I think that that makes sense. I'm not saying that that's exactly what's going to or that is exactly what's happening, but I certainly think that there's been an effort to bring down all traditional structures. And sure, they had problems, but it's just part of the dialectic of creating something that is much more controlling, and much more homogenized after that. And I'm going to hand it back to you in just a second, Terry. One quick thing I wanted to say. So Jen has his own podcast, which is The Threshold Saints, and he is practicing Buddhist and practices Kabbalah. And he has a lot of very interesting conversations with people who are in his sphere. They don't always agree, and it can be like very in-depth conversations. It's a great podcast, and he has a wonderful aesthetic that he tries to create for his show. He puts in a lot of work. So if you're interested in checking out The Threshold Saints, please do that. And if those types of conversations are something
Are you still there, Ash? I seem to have lost you for a minute. Yeah, okay. So it's not just me then. So we seem to have lost Ashley for a minute, but she's made some very good points there that I agree with a lot of what she says. Yeah, again, that the trouble with mainstream religions is that they can get co-opted, but it does seem like one of the narratives of the New World Order is they don't really want any of the traditional religions. They want a sort of one world religion. So I think then I'm just going to see what's happening with Ashley. Just give me a moment here, viewers and listeners. The problem I've got is she's hosting the show, so that I'm not sure I can carry on by myself. We might have to restart this. So going back to Sun's comment about evolution, you might be surprised to hear that as a science guy, I'm quite skeptical about the conventional explanation of Darwinian evolution. There are a lot of problems and gaps that it's very difficult to close. It's kind of hard to believe that all these species arose just by random mutations and evolution, because in all the time that we've had the theory of evolution, which is now 150 years, no new species has arisen or been created by man. And you think that would be, they like genetic experiments, they're breeding fruit flies all the time to see, and you get all these different variations of wing length and eye color and all sorts of things. I've done a few experiments like that myself at school. But you never ever get a new species of fly that's created out of all these experiments. So, and my wife is a biochemist, and she points out the fact that she knows about the complexity of all these interacting biochemical reactions in the cells of our body, and when you start thinking about it, it's kind of mind-boggling how these could be created by random mutations in genes, because they're all so interdependent on each other. You have hundreds of chemicals, and this chemical A depends on chemical B, and all round in this great circle. And if any one part of that cycle is wrong, the whole thing breaks down. So you could, by chance, by itself, you'd have to have the whole thing arising intact. So I think that's the biggest problem of, people talk about problems of evolving an eye or something like that bit by bit, which is hard to imagine. But with these biochemical pathways, it's very hard to imagine how it could all arise just by random mutations. Ashley is back with us. Hooray. I was trying to hold the fort with that. I wasn't sure you were going to be able to come back into this since you dropped out. I wasn't sure if we had to restart because you're the host. But I'm pleased to see you back. I was just talking about evolution and what else was I talking about? Religion's getting co-opted. So, and the one world religion that the New World Order wants. So, back over to you.
Very good. Thank you so much for holding it down. I think everybody knows that I've been having internet problems, and it was supposed to have been fixed today, which is why I was able to come on with my camera and all that good stuff. And then just right during our stream, it just dropped out for no reason. So now I'm on my hotspot for my phone.
We're under
And
attack, people.
we are under attack. And I had some of the comments pulled up, but I can't access Rumble right now. So I'm just going to go.
Sorry.
Yeah, no worries. But I forgot. I lost my place. Oh, so I was saying that yes, so please check out Jen's podcast, The Threshold Saints. And there's a lot of information to be found there and a lot of food for thought. And you may not agree with everything, but the main thing is having good faith, interesting, educational conversations. So that is the chats or the shout outs in the chats that I wanted to do. Also, we have Ricky, Anything is Possible, or from Anything is Possible, in the chat as well. And then just lively conversation over in Rumble. So thank you guys so much, and my apologies for the connection issues. So yes, back on the topic of yes, that I believe that they are trying to kind of do away with the institutional religion or our faith in that, and that I definitely believe that a lot of that has been co-opted, just to kind of piggyback on what you were talking about earlier, Terry. So I do understand that. And I guess the way that I think about that, oh, and not to just be picking on the Catholic Church. We've seen many, many instances of fraud in, in the Protestant realm, to be sure. And we've had a lot of people that it seems like they, for some reason, that particular realm is very ripe or capable or whatever you want to say for what we would now call grifters, but would be, like Jim and Tammy Faye Baker, for example. These are people that kind of set up these ministries, and they start getting a little taste of fame, and they start getting the money train rolling. And whether or not they actually, they ever started with good intentions, it certainly did not stay that way. And then we've had a lot of other people, Joel Osteen and Paula White, that now is associated with the White House. These people that are speaking about prosperity gospel and things like that. So there is certainly a landmine out there for people that are looking for guidance. I feel that it's particularly nefarious because it is trying to get people who are really searching for help and meaning and growth in their life, and it's catching them at a very vulnerable spot. And I think that can actually be applied to the situation that if you're talking about people that are transgender. I think that sure, there are some people that do not fall in this category, but there's a lot of people that are simply lost, and they're looking for something to make sense to them. They're looking for perhaps an explanation for why they feel, not at home, basically, in this world, in their body, in their mind. And then you sort of have this like predatory medical institution, and that would include psychology as well, that kind of catches these people. Now, that doesn't describe every situation, of course. Like sometimes it's parents that want to have this badge of honor of having a child of this nature. But I'm just saying in general, like I feel that a lot of these people are lost, and they're caught up in an institution that they trust. So that sort of extends over many, many facets of religion, or the people who treat medicine as a religion. Over to you, Terry.
Yeah, some very good points there again. I think what you said is right. There are people who they're looking for some sort of more spiritual aspect to their life, and so they might go to the local church or the mosque or the temple or whatever, and there are a lot of people who can sort of gain access to a more spiritual side of things by doing that. But it's like we say, you were saying, you do have this problem that maybe the priest you're going to see is not a very nice person, and he's a bit of a grifter, and he's doing bad things with children. And as you rightly said earlier on, the church, on both Catholics and Protestant churches, don't seem to have the will to tackle these people properly. and sort of get rid of them out of the church, which is what should happen. They just move them on to another parish and try and sweep it all under the carpet because they think it's bad for their image. So, but I think the problem I always have with it is that I don't really see why I need an intermediary to kind of talk to God. I remember watching it's probably a Hallmark film a while ago, and it was like a pioneer type guy who'd got a mail order bride, and he was a very religious guy, but he would just go out into this nice beauty spot in nature and sort of pray to God and sing hymns, and he was kind of like communicating directly to God. And I was thinking, if religion was like that, I wouldn't really have such a problem with it. But as soon as you get an intermediary, then they're going to want to try and control your access and maybe charge you. This is a thing that used to happen a lot in medieval times in England, and Chaucer wrote a lot about this, that the church even back then was totally corrupt, and they'd be charging you money to sort of forgive your sins. And so all these bishops would end up, very rich and going around in rich clothes and eating much better than the peasants that were living on their land. And you sort of think they've kind of, and that's what Chaucer would sort of send them up, because he knew that with sort of, it was like the start of British humor, and he was sort of, being very sarcastic about them. The fact that they were living these high lives while all the peasants around them were starving, living on the land of the bishops. So, the problem goes back a long way. And every time there has been an effort to sort of get rid of that intermediary kind of middle management layer between you and God, the church, which was the Catholic Church back then, would sort of clamp down on it. And there was the very last crusade, probably not a lot of people know this, was actually directed against fellow Christians in the south of France, called the Albigensian Crusade. And they just said, oh, you're a load of heretics, because they were trying to do this more sort of direct access to God thing, direct access to spiritual knowledge. And the church, of course, didn't like that, because they would lose control over it. So they went around and killed lots of people. And there was a famous quote by some religious guy, maybe even a bishop, because the soldiers approached him. They said, we don't know who are the heretics and who are the good people. And he said, kill them all and let God sort them out. So, this is the sort of thing you have to deal with mainstream religion, to me. So I'm skeptical. That's all I can say about it. So, but I do believe in God, and I do believe in higher powers and higher beings and a spiritual realm. But I just don't see why someone has to tell me what I have to do to access that knowledge and that realm. So anyway, over to you.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I don't necessarily, well, I don't know. I wish that we had somebody who was a little bit more versed on the exact phrases, because I do think that even in the Bible that it discusses, and if I have this wrong, my sincere apologies, that the church is you discussing and worshiping with friends and family, that I don't think it specifically states that you have to have and be taking part in some big organized structure. And so I think that it is okay for people to worship in the way that they want, if they are, having these conversations with their friends and family. And and I don't know, though. I mean, I subscribe to that, but I'm just saying, as far as the organized religion stuff, like, I still think that is good for people. I think that it is. And I think CJP Rumble over in the Rumble chat was saying that they're okay with the traditional religion and more concerned about the tech bro, because we have these Peter Thiel and his acolytes, and we're starting to see this with Peter Thiel saying that he converted to Catholicism, and Candace Owens saying that she converted to Catholicism. And I think that there is very clear that there's some kind of angle here. What exactly is that angle, except for the new world religion, I don't know. And it's not one of the areas that I feel super well versed in, but I think it's interesting for us to be aware of that and know that, yes, something is going on with the tech bros and religion. Now, one of the things, this is a really good conversation, and there's a lot to talk about here. But one thing that I wanted to talk to you, Terry, about was you said that you felt like you had close to a near-death experience while dreaming. So I would like to get a little bit more information from you. And before I hand it over, I wanted to say that this has been quite a while now, but Jen and I had a conversation on. Oh, I apologize, Jen. I cannot remember the name of the podcast that we were on. It was not Jen's Threshold Saint, but we were talking about, and we did at least 2 parts to this, and we still should do another, maybe revisit it at some point. But we did an pretty in-depth conversation about near-death experiences. So in the reading that I did, it does talk about these, as Terry said earlier, these ineffable experiences, which is that it's difficult to describe, it's difficult to fully put into words, but there are 12 commonalities. I don't remember every one off the top of my head, but one of the, or a handful of them, are going to be some that we all know very well, which is the dark tunnel. It is the light, going towards the light. It is out of body experiences. It is meeting your loved ones. It is having an awareness that if you pass this border, this boundary, that there is no going back, that there's a knowledge of a permanent decision. There is sometimes meeting your maker or meeting God, basically. And there's some interesting feedback from people who experience this, because it tends to align with whatever their religious beliefs here on earth are. But that is part of it. Sometimes it is seeing beautiful images so beautiful that you can't really even describe them to other people. As Terry was saying, it is the feeling of unconditional love that people say that they thought they knew what unconditional love was, but this was a completely different experience. It's sometimes hearing the most beautiful music you've ever heard in your life. So the interesting thing, though, is that the people that study these near-death experiences and really try to look at it from, sure, we're looking at it from the spiritual and from the religious experience angle, but they were trying to do it in a scientific way and to get really accurate information. So one thing of note is that a lot of times people, the people that are able to report back are people who are having a cardiac event. So I think that is something to note, but that doesn't necessarily mean that those are the only people, and that is the only way that you can experience this. And as Terry said, sometimes it happens in dreaming, sometimes it happens in meditation. And so it's a really, really unique experience. But one of the things that is reported back often is that people they can feel lonely and isolated because other people don't understand what you've been through, but they also seem to feel a bit more peace and have a sense of peace here on earth, because it removes a level of fear for them about what is next, what is after that. So I want to hand it over to you, Terry, and tell us about your dream and tell us about your thoughts on that.
Sure, yeah. You're bang on the money. Jin, I need to underline what you were saying. He's a very clever guy, very knowledgeable, knows a lot about a lot of religions. Well worth listening to his podcast because he's got a lot of good stuff to say. Yeah, the as you say, the near-death experience, they have a lot of commonalities. Depending on your religion, you'll sometimes, you'll meet maybe Jesus or Muhammad, but outside of that, a lot of the experience is very similar. And you've gone through some of the main points there. The one I thought of that I don't think you mentioned was the life review. You often have the life review as well, where you're experiencing important events from your life, and you can experience it from both your point of view and the person you're interacting with point of view, and you actually feel those things as if you were that person as well. So obviously these things are completely outside our normal experience here on Earth. To talk about my dreams, I actually had two that I really remember. One was when I was thinking, because they often talk about, the other thing they often mention in these near-death experiences is you meet your kind of like your guardian angel. I forget what the term they tend to use, but it's like your sort of kind of like your angelic mentor, the person who's kind of keeping an eye on you down here and making, trying to steer you in the right direction from time to time, which is what I think happens. I think we have free will to do what we want, but we get a little steer every now and then to try and make sure we stay on the path, and we can choose to do that or not. So my first experience was that I said I wanted to meet my mentor. I think I described it as a mentor rather than an angel or whatever. And I did, and we had this sort of kind of like an embrace, but it doesn't really, the word embrace doesn't really do it justice, because it was a sort of kind of like a full body experience. But as you were saying, you having sort of sensations that you don't experience down here. So it was like a full out of body experience, really. And people talk about this 360 vision you have. So I was getting all of that, and the love thing definitely was very overwhelming. And the other dream I remember was kind of going into this thing that was a bit like a stadium that was full of entities. They weren't people. I couldn't really describe I can't really remember, but they didn't look like people. But it was more that you sensed their presence rather than actually saw them or heard them. Again, it was sort of sensations that you don't really experience down here, and just being overwhelmed by this wave of love. And it was a time in my life where I was feeling it was a difficult time in my life. So it's kind of something I needed, really. It's kind of making you think that you weren't alone, and you weren't, and you were still being kind of looked after from somewhere else. So it was years and years ago I had this. It was very memorable. I remember it even now. And then again with the second dream, it was like having sensations that you don't really experience here. You sort of connecting directly to these other entities and sort of feeling what they're feeling without them saying anything. I mean, there was no words that I remember being spoken in the dream at all. And even the sort of sights were not quite the same as your vision down here. It was much more enhanced, and yeah, it's ineffable is the way you describe it. It's very difficult to put into words. And it wasn't like I was dying or anything. It was just, like I said, I was thinking about it, and actually, like as you were talking about, I was reading a lot about this scientific research that was done into near-death experiences and mediumship. And I can tell you that the science that is done in these areas and in the areas of paranormal phenomena in general is 10,000 times more rigorous than, for example, virology, which I discovered recently is a load of crap. So it's probably some of the best science that's done, and it's because they're faced with so much skepticism that they have to be super rigorous, and they try to close every sort of little door that skeptics can try and wriggle through and say, oh, you didn't do this. So yeah, it's very impressive. It's a real phenomenon. Over to you.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting point that you brought up, because it could certainly be easy for us skeptics to say, well, what does your science look like? But I will say that at least in the books that they publish, a lot of them try to be really clear about, just like what you said, to really prove that they tried to be objective, that they tried to have a rigorous approach to this conversation with people, and to try to make sure that they are getting clear, concise information, and to collect these various experiences and to find these commonalities. And that's one of the questions that I had for you, Terry, was, and you answered it, but I was wondering if you felt like you were dying, or if there was maybe a loved one was dying, or or you were in that time of your life or something that you had experienced a loss and or a health situation that would perhaps precipitate this, because oftentimes it is in a health crisis, whether it is from a car accident or, like we talked about earlier, from cardiac arrest. Or, I had a friend who was giving birth and she had a complicated delivery and she herself had a near death experience. And before I hand that over to you, someone, our son in our chat,
Wow.
said, I went to hell. Must have been there for a long time, but then I went to heaven. It's a golden city that gets bigger the further you go, sitting in the sky, in just sky dimension, where there was these floating, glowing stardust clouds that turned into 8 to 10 foot tall beings with wings that could read my mind. So it is really
That's
interesting.
awesome.
And thank you for sharing that with us. And this is one of the things that is also discussed in this research, because sometimes people have hell experiences and it is written about in
Yeah.
literature. It is represented in cinema and television as well. And people do talk about this. Now, sometimes it doesn't necessarily mean that they are a horrible person here on earth, but sometimes it can mean that they have unfinished business, that they have something that they need to correct, something that they need to amend, something that they need to change. So it can be a learning opportunity for them, but the hell experience does exist.
Yeah.
And that also has commonalities with other people that experience that. And it is not necessarily what we maybe have been taught, not necessarily fire and brimstone, but it is certainly a hellish experience, and it's very scary for these people that do experience it. So oh yes, Sun also says, I went to an abyss, like a dimension where there was nothing. And yeah, that is one of the things that people, part of their experience, I think sometimes that could be maybe associated with the tunnel experience of traveling in one direction or another. And sometimes that is frightening to the person and sometimes it's not. But anyway, I wanted to hand it back over to Terry to talk a little bit more about the situation surrounding you when you had that dream. And then the other thing that I wanted to ask you about was, after you had the dream, so you had this beautiful experience, you felt like you saw beautiful things, you did feel unconditional love, you did feel accepted, and did this give you a peace of mind going forward? What did you consider this a life-changing event for you?
Yes, it definitely was. I think it was when I was sort of, I was still a bit on the kind of atheistic side of things, although I was reading about all these this research into NDEs and paranormal stuff, and starting to believe that there was something more to life, that wasn't available to our five senses. Sounding like David Icke now. And I spent a lot of my time being afraid of stuff and afraid of death in particular. And that was kind of crippling my life, really, because you sort of thinking, oh, I've got to do this because I'm only getting one chance at this. And then you can get a bit obsessed about it if you think you've only got one shot here. So it did help a lot once I became convinced that that this life isn't all there is. So having read all this research and having experienced it myself slightly, I mean, it wasn't as like a full NDE. In answer to your earlier question, I wasn't ill or anything. I think it's just because I've had a few experiences in my life where if I've started to really investigate something that's kind of a bit paranormal or outside the norm, things start happening to me a bit. Not very much, but I did that when I was trying to sort of do manifestation, and also when I was reading about this phenomenon, which we talked about in our New Year special a couple of years back, something called Jot, which is just one of those things where little objects can disappear for no apparent reason, then reappear somewhere else without warning. And people say it's the most common paranormal experience, but most people don't think of it as paranormal. They just think, oh, I've just lost my biro somewhere. I don't know where I put it. Oh, there it is, you know, and I'm sure I looked there. So I had a few of those things happen as well. So yeah, in my life, sometimes when Fiona thinks I'm sort of gifted in that way, but I'm not really compared to most people. But she's not got anything at all to call on. But I used to do this thing where I would, when we were living in the UK, we would be working in different places. She'd get the bus home. I'd quite often be using the car to get to work, or a bike. So I'd get home at some time, and her bus stop was at the end of our road. And I'd just get the feeling, I think Fiona will be arriving now. So I'd go to the bus stop and the bus would arrive and she'd get off the bus. But she wouldn't leave at the same time from work every day. It would be completely different time every time. So I did this about half a dozen times where these kind of things work best when the advantage I've got is my brain is kind of empty a lot of the time. I'm not really thinking about anything in particular. And they say that's when, you know, things can just arrive in your head. So because I tend to not think about very much when I'm wandering around, this sort of feeling would come into me and I'd think, oh, I think Fiona might be arriving now. And I'd go there. I don't think I ever got it wrong. I think every time I've done that, throughout our time together, I've done it about, I don't know, 12, 20 times, not a huge amount, but enough that, you know, both of us think it's a thing. So yeah, I am slightly more tuned in than some people, but I'm not like psychic or anything, but I'm miles away from that sort of ability. But as I say, sometimes when I look into things, things start to happen to me. So yeah, back to you. I think I've answered all your questions there, hopefully.
Yes. I find that to be very interesting, and I definitely think that this gives credence to what we're discussing as far as having energetic connections with people and with our surrounding. And there's just some connections here, even in the earthly realm, that it would be difficult to explain in, you know, from a normal everyday perspective. There are these connections energetically that transcend that. And, you know, there's a lot of interesting conversations unfortunately, some very terrible experiments have been done as far as testing twins and things like that. And there's a famous example of three brothers out of New York who were all adopted out. I mean, and it honestly it sounds like a continuation of intelligence and some of the Nazi holdover experiments on people. But these three brothers were twins triplets, and they were separated at birth, and then they were studied through their life. And it was a chance encounter. I was just rereading about that this week that brought them together, and they found each other. So they're essentially, this experiment was being done on them, and it was done on a lot of other people as well. And the kids were not told about it. The adopting families were not told about this. And so they were, at the time that the documentary on this was filmed, they were not able to get information. They don't even know how many children and families this affected. But the reason that I'm bringing this up is because these people, these brothers, they all had a ton of similarities. Like they liked the same kind of woman, like a little bit older than them. They smoked the same kind of cigarettes. They had a similar gait when they were walking, things like that, like things that are really unexplained. Now, of course, we have the genetic element and the DNA element, but I also feel like there is just a sense between these people. There's something more there. And I definitely think that exists on this realm, and not everybody is open to that. So maybe that's part of what you're working on, Terry, is making yourself more open and more available to that kind of connection, you know, with Fiona. And Sun was saying in the chat that that was called channeling. And they also said twins are a good example of quantum entanglement and the variation change chain. So what do you think about all that, Terry?
That's one theory of the sort of telepathy thing is the quantum entanglement thing, but I don't know. It's yet another thing we don't know. I will say that psychic phenomena are real for sure, and again, the research that's been done on this is some of the best research you could think of. It's extremely rigorous and watertight, and these things have been proved in the lab. Things like telepathy, psychokinesis, where you influence objects by the power of your mind, prediction. All these things are actually real phenomena, but they're just very weak. So that you need to do a lot of repetitions to find an effect. But if you do the experiment often enough, you will get an effect that is statistically significant in that. The chance of it happening by chance would be like 1 in a million, or if you pull these results together, it'd be like 1 in a billion. So these things are definitely real. And seemingly twins are, and you hear a lot of stories about it as well, that, twins do have this kind of psychic connection, maybe because they're so genetically similar. And you hear a lot of stories about, something happens to one twin, they get in an accident, and the other one experiences the pain or knows instantly that something's wrong. So there's too many of these stories for it to be dismissed out of hand. So so good point. Quantum mechanics does maybe give you. I could talk about quantum mechanics for ages, actually, but maybe we'll do that for another podcast. I think the main message from quantum mechanics is that consciousness is the primary thing of the universe. So that is what causes everything to happen. So maybe I'll go into that a bit more in another episode. But a lot of physicists don't like to accept that fact, and they sort of use quantum mechanics to do their calculations and make lovely new gadgets, but they don't think about the philosophical implications of it. And actually, it means that consciousness is the driver of the universe. It's higher than matter and energy. So that's another way you can sort of know that the spiritual realm is real and important, and that it's basically the way that everything is created. That's a bit deep, but I'll hand it back to you.
Well, I think that it's a really fascinating thing to discuss. And I know that there's a lot of opinions on this, but I certainly think that it's valuable to have these conversations. And, we have people in the chat talking about what they think about it with their input, which we very much appreciate. And if we are going to really figure out what we believe or to express what we believe, then it's very valuable to have these types of conversations. One thing that I wanted to bring up was Jen was talking about what Terry is referring to is called RIGPA, which is RIGPA, very real. Quote, diamond, thunder, mind, karma, red string. So about the red string connection that you and Fiona have together. And it would be very fascinating for him to come on and chat with us about this at some point, because I think that there's a lot that we can learn from that, and a very interesting thought. So let's see here. We had another comment. And so Jason Barker was talking about in the chat that something that he has a concern about in an earthly sense is when he moves on to the next life or to the afterlife or whatever we're going to call it, that he is who's going to take care of things here on earth, who's going to take care of his family, who's going to be the provider where he has been doing that role. And he says Jesus told us to release those burdens, but it's hard when you love your family so much. And I think that's a valuable concern. So Terry, when you had your near-death experience, did you feel or have a concern or a fear about what was left here on Earth? Because I will say that in the reading that I did, once people had that experience, it really changed their outlook on the nature of reality. I think it really removed fear from them of for themselves, but also for their family. So,
Yeah.
um, did you have any experience with that?
Definitely that it changed my attitude to things and took away the fear of death. But I just want to say again, it wasn't really a near-death experience. I wasn't ill or dying or anything. It was just a sort of very hyper vivid dream. And you do hear about people in dreams getting that sort of contact with recently departed loved ones, because it's kind of like the veil's a bit thinner when you're in the dream world and you have more access to that realm, I think. Particularly if you're sort of kind of feet on the ground, rooted in concrete sort of person. It doesn't think about that very much. Some people don't really have access to that unless they're asleep and in the dream world. So, sorry, I've forgotten your other question. What was your other question, Ash?
Well, basically that did you have your yeah, and I apologize if I'm referring to it as near death, because you did say that it was different, but it sounded like there was a lot of overlap there. There was enough there to be really impactful for you and to almost get a glimpse
Oh yeah,
of what those people who have
definitely.
NDEs experience without having the death experience. But so basically my main question was just that you did answer this. You said that it removed your fear of dying, and I think that it made you worry less about what was happening in the earthly realm. Is that correct?
Yeah, yeah, yes, yeah. Yes, Son says he had a lucid dream. That's exactly what it was like. It was a very lucid dream. Um, I had a couple of other strange dreams. I think I mentioned this the other day when I had a false awakening, which is kind of like a lucid dream. I thinking about it, it was possibly an out of body experience where I got up out of bed and tried to turn the light on, and it was just a normal. It was when I was living with my parents. It was just a normal looking my bedroom, but I couldn't work the light switch, and for some reason, and it was thinking about it. It might have been that my hand was going through it, and it when I looked at it carefully, it was kind of shimmering, and then I thought, "Hey, that's really weird." And then immediately I woke up back in bed. Fortunately, at the time, I didn't when I was if I was out of body, I didn't look back at the bed and see myself there, because I think that would have freaked myself out. But people do have those experiences as well, where they're sometimes in the sleep or sometimes just when they're awake, they sort of float out of their body and look at themselves from above. And in fact, my dad had that experience when he told me he was very ill as a child, and he remembers floating above his body, looking down on it, and he described it as a glorious feeling. And if you knew my dad, he never used a word like that. He was very down to earth Yorkshireman. So that must have been a very impactful experience for him. So yeah, Son said something interesting that I wanted to come back on here. What was that? He said, "What do you think about dreams and deja vu being a bleed effect from another reality?" I think that's very possible, or it's just that a lot of the things in your life are mapped out, and some important landmarks have been signed to you before you get here, and then when you see them, you sort of think, "Oh, that seems familiar." Now, I said my wife doesn't really have experience like that. The one time she said she had that in her life, we met way back when we were both working for a dairy. Actually, I was working in a lab, and she'd started working as a food scientist in the UK, and she remembers having this really familiar feeling when she was walking along, just coming up to where she was going to have her interview, just by one of the buildings, and she just thought she was overwhelmed with this feeling. Oh, this seems really familiar and sort of comfortable. And what she said about it later, which is quite sweet, really, she said that was the place where she first saw me. So I think that might have been an example where someone's getting a bit of a steer, and this is an important thing that could happen here. So and I've again in my research, I've read a lot about these sort of things that people are given sort of kind of, particularly with their partners, they're given things to look out for in their partners, and so that when they see them, they sort of, that's why they have that connection, feel like they have that connection with them. And of course, it may be that they've, if you believe in multiple lives, that they have actually had other lives with these people. So that's another explanation. Sometimes you meet somebody, you sort of think, wow, these people seem really familiar and sort of comfortable. Just a thought. Back to you.
Yeah, that's really very, very lovely. And one of the things that I wanted to say, and I think that does sound, and if Jen is still listening, or if you're not, you'll have to let me know later. But I think that does apply with the red string theory, the connections that we have with people, and that maybe you have known each other in a lot of other ways and a lot of other times. And again, in my conversations with Jen, something that we talk about is the wheel of time, the ages of man. And something, sometimes I'm like, maybe I'm crazy, but sometimes, because we talk about all of this, fighting tyranny and where we're at as just the world and humans and the United States and the UK and Europe and all these issues and the predator class. And then we have the discussion of, well, we're in a spiritual war. Some people believe that we're in a spiritual war. I do subscribe to that. And one of the things that I think about is that maybe it is the wheel of time, and that it was always going this way and it's not going to stay this way. And this is just the nature of being humans in this earthly realm. And and that's something that Jen and I talk about, kind of these ages of men, right? And in this theme is found in the fantasy series A Wheel of Time by Robert Jordan. And that is one of the points of the book, is that these people have known each other before. They have been connected to each other before. So you have this battle between light and dark, and you have essentially the man in black trope, but that man in black is in a different body with a different name every time, but it's the same relationship. So not that this is exactly like that, but I always find it very interesting when we see these themes and these archetypes in something that seems lighthearted, such as, fantasy fiction reading. But then we see that tied in with examples that we see in real world, in mythology, in all of these different areas. So that, for me, it just makes me think that there's something more to it. There's a reason that these archetypes and these themes and these myths exist, is because maybe there's at least something for us to consider about these connections. And like what you were talking about, that perhaps you and Fiona have known each other for a lot longer than we can describe in this earthly realm. And I think that I enjoy thinking about these things, sometimes pondering the nature of our relationships with each other, and the relationships, or the just where mankind is, and trying to figure out our place in this world and what we believe. And there's a lot there.
It's a very interesting thing to think about. Yeah, what exactly we're up against. I mean, I do agree with you that it's a spiritual war. I might not necessarily have 100% agreed before COVID, but that made it clear to me that we are in a spiritual war against dark forces. And I often wonder what these, the top of the predator classes that you like to call them, really are. Are they just like us, who've just gone down the wrong path, or are they, been taken over by evil dark entities, or are they really alien lizard people? Because a lot of them do seem quite different to normal people like us. And I use the word normal advisedly for myself, obviously. But, they seem to lack basic human empathy and feelings for their fellow man. They're psychopaths, really, as we know. But what made them that way? I do believe that dark entities exist. I've heard a lot of stories of, people being possessed by them and being successfully freed of them, and then it changes the way their life is. So yeah, I mean, and it makes you wonder, why. I do sometimes wonder why, if there's a God and these higher beings up there, why are they allowing all this evil to persist in the world? Is it just to challenge us and make us stronger? Is it like the old saying, what doesn't kill you make you stronger? And what I've heard from the people who you have these people who get regressed into their past lives, and they will often say that they talk about coming to Earth as being like a tough gig, and but it's good because it's good for your spiritual development to be up against adversity. And we do seem to be up against a lot of adversity. But I also think that we may, all of us who are here at this time may have chosen to be here at this time because, you have, it's like the old curse, the Arabic curse that's, with, I hope you live in interesting times. We live in very interesting times at the moment, but they are difficult times. But maybe we chose to be here because they are interesting times. And, if there's a great turning upon us, which some of the new agey type people say, it would be quite interesting to see that, wouldn't it? So, but hopefully we're just going through a lot of adversity and good times are around the corner. Who knows? Over to you.
Yeah, I definitely think that there's something to that, whether or not we chose to be here during these interesting and challenging times and times that certainly feel revelatory, or whether or not we're placed here for a specific reason, we don't understand. And these are part of the question that I have, and that I hope one day, if I'm able to make it to the other side, which I hope that I do, that I'll have an answer to. And I think that that's part of being a human on the earth, that maybe it is one of the points, or one of the lessons is that we understand our limitations, that there's a lot that we can't know, even if we would really like to know them. And then how do we approach not being able to know, and what information and what sources and what spiritual practices do we implement to help us with that? And I think that in a lot of ways, that's when, practicing your religion can provide you with comfort, of course, but also I think that it can help you maybe not feel the need to understand everything, because you feel like you understand what you need to understand for the time that we're in, if that makes sense. And Sun was saying the lizard people was just a joke about sociopaths. And I think that was an interesting point, because I don't know, I do refer to them as the predator class, and I don't call them the lizard people. But obviously we know that some figures out there, such as David Icke, has essentially alluded to them being extraterrestrial, or whatever you want to say. But I certainly find that to be an interesting thought. And even Archaics, Jason Brashears, talks about that. Well, he believes in simulation theory, and he believes that there are people who, I may be bastardizing his opinions, I don't mean to do that, but basically that there are some people here that are holdouts or leftovers from the simulation, like that the predator class, they know what the deal is. They know the score. They know that we're in a simulation. They figured out how to game the simulation. However, it costs them in other ways. Now, is that accurate? Of course, I have no way of knowing that, but I certainly think that when we're in the context of spiritual warfare, and it feels like that generationally, certain families have known how to hack the human situation and the human condition to have all the power and all the wealth and amass it in their own family, and they know how to do that, then I think that maybe that gives some credence that to the very least that they have information that we don't have. And they're powerful enough to change a narrative. And we know that. We saw what happened during COVID times. We saw the definition of previously agreed upon words get changed in real time. So if they're able to do that right in front of our face, and these are also the same people that are infiltrating major organizations, and they have access to information that we don't have access to, then why would we think that they aren't changing history as well? Now, in my conversation last night on Angry Tiger's Den, Jason Barker was there, John Brisson, I apologize, I don't remember the other guy, and Franco. And they were talking about this, and that was one of the things that excuse me, that John Brisson was basically thinking that, you know, we don't necessarily need to try to understand all of this. And maybe that's a fair point, but I just think that, you know, that it's at least a legitimate question to have.
Yeah. I'm just a curious person, I guess. I want to know all the answers. One of the interesting things that these people who have near-death experiences often say is that, you know, apart from the checklist that you were going through, they often say that suddenly they know the answer to all these questions, and they have all this knowledge, and then they come back to Earth and it's all gone. So it's like we have this sort of kind of amnesia when we're down here, and we haven't got connections to all this knowledge that we might have in the higher realm. And maybe that's for a reason. Maybe we're sort of being kept partially blind to keep us on this little path so that we can learn our particular life lesson, but we're not supposed to understand how the whole world works. So yeah, it's interesting to think about. So, but I've got a lot of questions for when I go up there. Virology, I'm going to ask about that. Do viruses exist, and do they cause disease? That's going to be one of mine. So yeah, I've got a lot of questions, and hopefully I'll find out. And then I'll come back again next life and I'll forget it all. It's a bit frustrating, really, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it is a little frustrating, because that's one of the things that I think about is that I hope that I know. I hope that I can get the answers to my questions, but then I also think, well, maybe you won't care when you get there. Maybe as you were discussing these ineffable experiences. Oh, Justin has joined us here. Hello. Can you hear us?
Justin joining. Yes. Justin in the house.
I couldn't figure out why I was hearing an echo. It's because I also had the YouTube up.
Okay, perfect. So we were just and I was just finishing up really quick my thought, because we were talking about religion, spirituality, near-death experiences, and that kind of thing. But basically, I was just saying that I do hope that we will get the answer to our questions, but maybe whenever we're having these ineffable experiences that we've been talking about, that you won't care or you won't need to know. But as Terry said, that is pretty well documented that when people have a near-death experience, that sometimes they get to that point, the threshold where they can make the decision of moving on or going back, that they do get the answers to their questions. But also, as Terry said, they cannot come back with that information. But the one thing that they often do come back with is the losing their fear of death, just like what Terry was talking about. Mm-hmm. So if you have anything that you want to talk about in that regard, Justin, or if you've ever had a near-death experience or know anyone that has.
Well, I wouldn't necessarily say...
Is it all fake and gay, Justin?
Well, probably. But I did have one incident probably around early 20s, and I was doing a lot of methamphetamines at the time, and there I had a like pocket knife that I was using to like scoop it out and like put from one bag to the other. I ended up cutting, like, it was a really bad cut in my hand, in my finger, and I hadn't slept for like 2 months. So at that point, I had convinced myself that my blood was turning into crystal meth and that I
Wow.
was not going to wake up and I was going to die. And I just accepted it. I was like, what are you going to do at this point? And funny story, I woke up the next morning and wasn't addicted to meth anymore.
Wow. That is quite amazing.
Yeah, so that was kind of when, like, after that, like, I'd made peace with God, and it was after that where I was like, I should probably be more Christian.
Yeah,
But
that's
Well,
very.
one thing that's amazing. Yeah. So I was going to say one thing we haven't really touched on, which Justin might be able to help out with, is that people often access these sort of experiences via psychedelics. Of course, I'm thinking of ayahuasca and things like that. What say you, Justin?
I think that it is very possible that there is a separate dimension where, like, like UV light, like we can only see spectrums from a certain wavelength. Like, why wouldn't there be an extra wavelength or something that we aren't in tune with? So there could be, like, everything could be happening at the same time in like another dimension that's the exact same as ours. I don't know, but
Absolutely, yeah.
I don't. It's all so weird, man. What's most interesting about like DMT psychedelics, though, is that they seem to. Well, one is, like, if you listen to Joe Rogan or all the DMT heads, they always talk about the machine elves, and even beside,
Yeah.
I never met any machine elves, but I did have the one time I did DMT. I smoked a little bit. I didn't break through or anything, but I just closed my eyes and enjoyed the visuals. And it was like, the only way I can describe the patterns was like a very South American, Incan, kind of stuff there. So it is very interesting that certain things always tend to lead people's trips in the same direction.
Yeah, it is very interesting. Yeah, you probably know that the shamans in South America, when you sort of talk to them about how they know how to make ayahuasca, they say, "Oh, the plant told us how to do it." It's really weird stuff.
And especially, like, I think that the vast majority of plants in South America, like in the rainforest, I if I remember right, I think that they say that they aren't even close to, like, there's more plants to find than we could ever even imagine. There are different
Yeah.
dimensions of
Yeah.
reality.
Yeah.
We're missing at least one universe dimension reality.
Machine elves are actually gnomes.
So I wanted
They
to
sound a
chime
bit
in
creepy,
here
those
because
machine elves. I wouldn't. Oh, sorry.
no worries. So something that I think about when we're talking about the machine elves and psychedelic experiences, and yes, as Terry was saying, the ayahuasca told us how to make it. So this is something that, and I'm not an Orthodox Christian, but I was in a group where the leader of that group was making they were getting confirmed as an Orthodox Christian, and they really thought that these sort of entities that you would interact with through psychedelics were demons. Now, not that demons were necessarily like sent from the devil. They said that demons were banal, but basically they had their own agenda, and that ayahuasca was part of that, and that it could be misleading that you're on this healing journey. You think you're healing, but if you do it enough, you're actually being managed and I don't want to say controlled, but influenced by this particular
Coerced.
entity. Yes, coerced. And that's one of the things that I think about. And I'm not on my soapbox telling people that I'm anti-psychedelic. I'm saying that for me, I think that it is worth being very careful if you were to go into that realm, because we don't have an understanding of what that realm is and where that energy is coming from. And it certainly is not in the not necessarily a God experience or that kind of thing. So then that makes me wonder, and this is not an original question, but what are you interacting with? What are you opening yourself up to? And I think it's worth being cautious. And then the other thing that I wanted to bring up is that just the concept of like, where do we get this information? Where, for example, in some of the older religions that are, I don't know if people refer to them as the earth religions or as paganism or whatever you want to call it, but that people are getting information from earth, plants, things like that. But where does that information come from? How does that happen? And what is the actual entity that is communicating with them? And I don't have an answer. I just think this is something that I think about in these, in this kind of realm.
Well, and I know like Joe Rogan, when they're talking about psychedelics a lot, they talk about the pineal gland creating androgenous DMT. So, and they also suspect like that's what happens when you have a near-death experience and your life flashes before your eyes. So that like I could definitely see like this being like a highway for separate entities to try and control you. That's interesting. I hadn't really thought, like, I should have gotten like super stoned for this topic.
I think when you're sort of anything you're doing like that is you're opening yourself up to entities, both good and bad. The classic example is when you're messing about with a Ouija board, and you can use it to communicate with your departed loved ones. But then, if you're not careful, some dark entity can hook into the channel, as it were, and sort of you end up with a lot of trouble. You hear a lot of stories about that as well. So I guess it's like any tool, you've got to be careful. You've got to know what you're doing, otherwise you could end up in trouble.
I will say that I have taken, Ashley mentioned like the God experience. I mean, I'm not going to say that when I was taking psychedelics, it was exclusively to try and reach that experience. It was also just really fun. But you hear these people talk about like, oh, I had like 2 grams of shrooms and I met God and yada, yada, yada. I've taken 12 grams of mushrooms and still haven't met any entities or gods or elves or anything like that. So that's what really fascinates me about all of that, is that I've never been able to reach that plane.
And I think it can be your state of mind as far as like whatever, because I've heard of people having pretty amazing reactions on really small doses of psychedelics as well. So I think there's something to that. But what do you think, Terry?
Yeah, it's puzzling, isn't it? Because, a lot of people report near-death experiences, but then a lot of people report being dead and being brought back to life, and they don't remember anything at all. So why is everyone's experience different? Maybe just because we're all different, or it's hard to get your head around it, really. You'd think we'd all be having near-death experiences when you die and get brought back to life, but that doesn't seem to happen. So, and similarly, I've not taken psychedelics myself, but a lot of my friends have, and they all report
Wink.
very different experiences. So some, like Justin say, they sort of end up in a higher plane, and some say it didn't really do anything to me at all. I'll say that I had scrambled egg and mushrooms today for lunch, and it didn't do anything for me. But that was just ordinary mushrooms, I guess.
Next time. Yeah, I'd say the saddest part about the whole, near-death experiences and all that stuff is that, or even just religion, is that you actually we won't know until it's too late.
Yeah.
What was that? Was it like Pascal's wager, where it's like it's smarter to be religious than not, just in case? Did I get any of that right?
That's what you said, Jan. No, that's absolutely correct. That was Pascal's wager, yeah.
Shocked I remembered that.
Well done.
So, speaking about some of these spiritual entities and what you're opening yourself up to, I wanted to bring up an interesting conversation from the chat. So, the other thing that I want to reiterate is that this is a free-ranging spiritual and religious conversation. So, we really didn't have a hard and fast agenda of things that we wanted to talk about. And I know that we're hitting and touching on a lot of different subjects, and some of them more in depth than others. So hopefully it's been food for thought and enjoyable for you. And, if there's more in-depth insight you would like to see, feel free to let us know. And you can always reach out to us at our Union of the Unknowns email account, which is unionoftheunknowns@gmail.com. So feel free to do that. And but one of the things that Ricky and Jason were talking about in the chat, outside of Jason now wanting some scrambled eggs, Terry, but we're talking about that we we never messed with a Ouija board, because although that is not a psychedelic or a drug entity, it certainly, you brought it up, is something that you potentially are channeling or in touch with an entity. And when I was young, I had this friend who moved away, and I remember talking to her on the phone, because kids still did that back in the day. And she was living with her aunt and her cousin, and her cousin would play with the Ouija board every single day during the summer. So I would ask her, what did the Ouija board say? And I don't know if I actually believed any of that or not, but one day she said that the Ouija board told her that another family member was going to pass away when he was 16 years old. And months later, that actually did happen. And so, and the guys, Ricky and Jason in the chat, were saying that they would never touch a Ouija board. And I 100% agree with that. It's weird that it's in the toy aisle, and that it's presented as a game. But that was a very scary experience for me. And I still question, like, am I crazy? Did that actually happen? Did I dream that? But it was a really wild story. And so I never will touch one. So, okay, I'm going to go to Jason I'm sorry, Justin. And then Justin, when you're done, hand it over to Terry.
Okay, I just wanted to ask, because I'm not super familiar with Ouija boards at all. What is there, like, some sort of like symbology or something on it that's supposed to make it attuned to a higher plane? Like, what is the difference between just like a piece of wood before it has a bunch of letters on it that makes it into a tool that can reach another dimension?
Shall I deal with this? It's a really good question. As far as I know, there's nothing special about it. It's just a load of letters, and I think you have a yes, no in one part of it as well, and you just move in the either a glass or what they call a planchette, which is the thing that everyone puts their hands on, and it just moves around. I don't know. It's a really interesting question why it seems to be so effective at, contacting spirits. But it does seem to be for a lot of people. But maybe they're just, they tell you to sort of get into a dark room and be very calm. And as I was, Ashley and I were talking about earlier in the pod, if you get in that sort of space where you're almost like meditative, you're more able to contact the other realm, I think. So, and maybe the fact that you're putting this light pressure on something means it's very easy for something to control your movements and move it around. So, it's just a tool, really. So, I guess maybe someone can come up with something that's just as effective as communicating. But like Ashley was saying, the problem is that once you start sort of making that connection, then darker entities can sort of seem to be able to come in and do bad things. So I don't think it's necessarily an evil thing in itself. As I say, I think it's just a tool, really. So, it's like if you've got a gun or a sword, a chainsaw, you can use a chainsaw to chop down a bit of the tree that's bothering you, or you can use a chainsaw to hack up a human being. So just got to be careful.
So I know we're trying to wrap up. I missed it. So Ashley is a believer in the Ouija board. Terry, you think it's spiritual, magical?
It definitely seems to work. Yeah, it definitely seems to be able to communicate with other
that coming from a man of science.
Yeah.
Well, I always thought it was just really silly, but I'll take it under more serious consideration if you suspect there's something happening with it. Interesting.
I think we were talking earlier about paranormal stuff, and it's like I think it's like a lot of other paranormal effects that skepticism seems to have a negative effect on it. So if you've got a Ouija board with a lot of skeptics sitting around it going, this is a load of rubbish, I don't think anything will happen. So I think you have to try and open yourself up to the possibility that it will work in order for it to work.
Well, that's reminds me of hypnotism, which, could the Ouija board be hypnotizing you?
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, I agree with you. It's similar in that. Although I remember there was a scientist I like, Richard Feynman. He didn't think he could be hypnotized, and he went up on a stage with a stage hypnotist, and he was trying to get him to do silly things, and he just sort of thought, "I'm just going along with this. I'm not really hypnotized at all." But then afterwards, he sort of thought, well, maybe that's what being hypnotized is all about. So I'd like to try it sometime. It sounds really interesting.
Yeah.
I'm very skeptical, so I'm not sure I could be hypnotized, but maybe I'm just fooling myself.
That'd be pretty. I would also love to try hypnotism. Maybe that's something. Maybe we can find a hypnotist to come on the podcast and try and hypnotize us.
Oh, that'd be great.
I don't know. Can it be done over a webcam? I would assume so.
No, that's a very good question.
We'll have to ask a hypnotist.
So
What do you think, Ash? You up for being hypnotized?
Well, maybe probably not. Maybe I'll just be an observer and make sure that things don't get out of hand with the hypnotist. But I'm curious about that too, and I have read in some recent books that it's pretty well known that I think most of the population can be hypnotized. There are some people who are resistant to that, but I also think that we're susceptible in different ways. So, for example, if even okay, so we know that the certain blue light that is emitted from screens and things like that have a hypnotic type effect. The light coming from a television has a hypnotic effect. Different cuts that they use in filming have a hypnotic effect. Then the placement of the television, so if it's above your eye line, that can add to a hypnotic effect. So I think that there's maybe we're more susceptible than we think we are to hypnosis. I would also like to think that I'm hypnosis resistant and that I am a skeptic. Now, I will say, when I was in college back in the day, they would have this guy, one of these like entertainment hypnotists that would come to kind of kick off the semester, and I would see the people get up there and, this is going to age me, but it was like guys singing Shania Twain and, dancing like a chicken and whatever. But they, and I saw them later and they really did it. Like they were not joking around. They really were hypnotized. And I always tried to, now I would be resistant to that. But at the time I was trying to be skeptical. I was trying to get into it, like slow your breathing, close your eyes, like to be one of the people chosen to be hypnotized. And then I always felt like, well, maybe I can't be. But since I've been reading lately about the importance of, or at least the element of hypnosis in the context of mind control and these human experiments that were done by, at least that we know of since before World War II, from the OSS and then the CIA and like whoever else they're cooperating with, that hypnosis is an important part of that, of mind control, an important element there. And that even with, so that if they're creating dissociative identity disorder, then they have a formula for the best and most effective way to do that. But one of the other things that people that are operating from a mind control capacity is to get that person to build actual walls and rooms in their mind, so that with these dissociative identities, like the main person or the main host will not know about the other personalities, but they also don't know about the hidden rooms where the information is hidden. But some of the personalities do know about that. So the idea of hypnosis to me is really interesting. And I know that some people will try to use it for their benefit to kick a bad habit or whatever that may be. But it also strikes me as scary because of what can be done to other people. And then the ways that they have figured out with, like I was saying, with blue light and things like that, that have a hypnotic effect on us.
It's a very interesting subject, and I agree with you that that's a classic MK Ultra thing, isn't it? The sort of trauma-based mind control, and some of the things they try to do is to create these multiple personalities, so that the personalities are split off from each other. And it is kind of crazy that in the research they do on these multiple personality people, that some personalities are completely disconnected from the others, in that they have got no awareness of what they were doing when they were as present as the other personality. It's really crazy stuff. I know we're going to wrap up, but a squirrel has come up with a comment, a very interesting comment here that I want to say something about. He says, Graham Hancock said that Terry Mallis invented the PCR test while under the influence of hallucinogens. Graham is a popular YouTuber involved in ancient history. Yeah. Sorry, Stella, we're going to talk a little bit about Graham Hancock, maybe. But,
I had the same thought. Stella's not going to like that.
Yeah. But what I will say is that I have heard a lot of scientists and creative people, artists, musicians, who often say that their best work either came to them in a dream or just came to them as if from out of nowhere. And it's like they had some contact with some other realm, and they didn't really feel like it was them doing it. And actually, a lot of sportsmen say this as well when they're sort of performing really well in the sporting field. they sort of feel kind of disconnected from their body, and it's like someone else has taken over and is doing it for them. So whether it's just they're accessing some part of their consciousness they can't normally access when they're just sort of, you know, thinking about how they're going to pay the mortgage and what they're going to have for tea, or whether it's, you know, maybe they are connecting to some other higher realm. It's kind of interesting, but that's quite a common thing, that top scientists and top creative people will get their best stuff kind of like from somewhere else. It's not like it's coming from them. Yeah.
The muse.
The news. Yes. CNN.
Yeah. So
MUSC.
and it was Carrie Mullis. Carrie. But yeah, that's an interesting thing.
Sorry, Terry Malice. I said Terry Malice as well. It is Carrie Malice, yeah.
But thank you, Brian. I did not know that. I hadn't heard that. And yeah, there certainly Jason Brashears has a lot of problem with Graham Hancock, and I don't know exactly the details, but basically he said that there's some block of time that he bases everything on, but it's been provably shown that that block of time is not correct. But either way, this conversation from him talking about Carrie Mullis is not really related to that. So I find it to be interesting. And I think that y'all had talked about this on a podcast before a long time ago. And Stella was talking about this as well, because she, as a performer, you do kind of have, you know, like she was doing live shows where she's singing and playing, you know, putting on a concert basically. And the ability to kind of find that flow state. So I think that brings up an interesting question, right? Because when is it a flow state? When is it the fugue state? You're in the zone, versus when is there some other interference or some other influence from an entity, you know? And I don't have an answer to that. I just think it's an interesting thing to think about. But certainly I know that when I was doing massage therapy and working on people, I definitely would get into a flow state. And so there's something about engaging your body in a familiar routine and a familiar flow that kind of allowed your mind to be in a different realm thought wise. And it wasn't, you know, these were not like out of body experiences or it was nothing crazy like that, but it allows you to have a different thinking while you're working with your hands, and there is a certain flow to the work. So I do find that to be very interesting, and where now I feel like I need to dig into the story about Carrie Mullis and the PCR test. And the other interesting thing is that we know that Carrie Mullis said the PCR test should never be used for detecting virus. And that's exactly what it was used for.
Absolutely not.
Yeah.
Well, if you consider government a virus.
Yeah. There's more evidence for government being a virus than for COVID, SARS-CoV-2 being a virus, in my opinion. Anyway. That's another story.
Okay, well, are we ready to wrap it up for today? What do we think, Terry?
Yeah, it's coming up to my bedtime. So yeah, I'm all for it.
All right, perfect. Well, I before we end up heading out, I want to shout out the people that were in the chat with us. So over on YouTube, we had our friend Ed at Dream Real. So very nice to see you, Ed. I don't know if you're still here or not, but really appreciate you dropping in today. And then we had Brian and Jenna at A Squirrel. And I also want to say that Brian and Jenna were who we interviewed with our communitarian episode, and they did bring up the point. They made a point that Patrick Wood wrote technocracy is not communitarianism, which I did see that article, and they have a friend, Lark in Texas, that they want us to have a conversation with, and I plan on doing that, getting that set up and facilitating that on those issues. But that is who A Squirrel is. And then of course we had Ism checking in to see if we were still available over on YouTube. Then we had Sun on Twitch. Thank you so much for your input and your thoughts, Sun. And then we had, again, our friends over on Rumble. We had Jen the Ninja. We had Jason Barker from Knights of the Storm. We had Ricky from Anything is Possible. And we had CPJ Rumble. And I feel like there was maybe someone else that I saw in there. R. Pike. So thank you so much, everybody, for joining us live. And we are going to try to get on a little bit more of a schedule. So we're working that out. But I know you understand because we have many different time zones in the unknowns. We have West Coast, Central, East Coast, whatever time zone Terry is in and whatever time zone Stella's in. So it's a lot. Terry wants to chime in. What do you got, Terry?
Well, I've got a few things. I'm in the UK time zone, actually, in the Canary Islands. I want to underline your thanks to all our viewers and listeners and all the people who joined in the chat. I want to say how nice it was to see Justin again after all these months and years. So it's been a long time since we shared the screen together.
Thank
you. But finally, sorry, yeah, carry on.
I just was
All
in
right,
it, bruv.
In it, bruv. Yeah, indeed. So, finally, I just have a question for Ashley. How may our viewers and listeners get in touch with us, Ashley?
Well, Terry, I'm glad you asked. They can find us at unionoftheunknowns.com. That's our Linktree page that has all the myriad ways to get in touch with us, from our Discord to our email to our voicemail, and even our Twitter account. So I want to thank Terry Canary for being here today. I really appreciate it. It's been a great conversation. I want to thank Ism Camp for being here as well. I am glad that you were able to hop in here, and hopefully we will be getting going, more regularly. And I also wanted to let everyone know that tomorrow we're going to be having a conversation with Stella Q, and Bettina Engler about the new book that has just come out, the children's book, Where Have Our Blue Skies Gone? So please feel free to join us for that. And we're going to be discussing the book, the inspiration, the process, and how you can purchase it yourself. The other thing that I wanted to shout out is Jason Barker from Knights of the Storm. Jason always promotes our show, and I really appreciate that. And I am on with them, Knights of the Storm, on Saturday afternoon, 2 p.m. Eastern, over on Rumble. So please feel free to join there. And otherwise, Terry, thank you so much. Justin, thank you so much. And I hope that everyone has a great evening.
Shout out to you two for
Bye,
keeping
everybody.
it going.
Thank
Good night.
you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you for tuning in for another episode of Union of the Unknowns. You can find new episodes every week on all your favorite podcasting networks.